and there were all these little girl fans there, start bumping you around, and there were three or four. Well, the next day there were like 12 or 15, and I finally said to my boss, hey, this can I park inside the lot, please, so I can go out different ways every day. So they let me do that. But you're right, Dan. It did get so bad that hard copy Paramount got bodyguards for me to escort me to and from work.
Dan, where do you land on Michael Jackson?
Why are you making me answer that?
I mean, were you a fan as a kid, like most people our age?
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, look, I want to be honest. I want to be an honest person in my life, right? And I do my best to tell the truth in all situations. So I will say that I have an ability to separate the music from the artist.
I am similar in that I can kind of separate the two. He's a fascinating person for a million different reasons. I remember as a kid, growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, he was ubiquitous. He was everywhere. And it was kind of like he was the biggest star on the planet.
I may have been one of the only people back when Thriller came out that found Thriller terrifying. That video scared the shit out of me, man.
So the reason I bring that up, obviously, is our guest on Off Script today is a woman by the name of Diane Dimond. If you followed the Michael Jackson story and the saga through all of its various incarnations, you've probably come across the work of Diane Dimond. She was a very prominent journalist for on a number of stories. And as she will tell you, there's a whole lot to her career and her work that was not Michael Jackson. But she was the one that broke the Michael Jackson news about the accusers way back when. And so she has seen a number of things, the world of celebrity and, kind of the parasocial relationship people have with celebrity, how that impacts news coverage, all of these things. But she's a really interesting woman with a lot of interesting stories to tell.
But with the whole Michael Jackson thing, like she got caught up that, if you remember, that entire thing was a circus. Like,
so I don't think circus even is the right word.
Yeah. Like back when he was going through the court proceedings and that whole news cycle, people were showing up from everywhere. The crowds were forming in front of courtrooms. He had, the defenders, the detractors, they went at it, man.
He was dancing on the hood of the car.
Dancing on the hood of cars. And, people are just so passionate about his guilt or innocence. And, obviously all the late night jokes and, that was a thing.
Yeah.
And, it's defined his legacy one way or another to this day. And Diane was in the middle of that circus.
So we will get out of the way and we will let Diane Dimond tell you these stories. So here it is, our conversation with journalist, reporter, Diane Dimond. Diane Dimond, a legend in the news game. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Well, no, we appreciate you joining us. And we're going to get to a lot of the things in your career. But I always like to ask people in the journalism space, how did you come to work in journalism? Like, what was it that brought you into this arena?
What misfortune befell you, like us?
What compelled me?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I come from Irish stock. Irish are born storytellers, as you know. I remember my family sitting around with visiting relatives telling stories. We didn't sit and watch television. We told stories. And I think when you asked me that, what popped into my mind was going to the local post office with my mother as a kid. She was a bookkeeper for the family business. And anyway, she was always at the post office and I was often with her. And I remember seeing America's Most Wanted, the 10 mug shots on the bulletin board in the post office. And just
Yeah.
while she did what she did, I was like staring at these faces and wondering, what did they do? How did they do? Well, my mother would never allow me to do that. And I just, I became entranced with human behavior and deviant human behavior, to be honest. And
Right.
but see what I did there. And I just wanted to understand the mindset of somebody who became a criminal. Sounds weird for a kid, right?
Yeah. Well, where'd you go to school? Where'd you study journalism?
I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, born in Burbank, grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, went to college for a nanosecond and said, that's not for me. I already have a job at KOB Radio, big 50,000 watt radio station. I was doing the newscasts there. And when I wasn't on the air doing newscasts, my beat was cops and courts.
Yeah.
So there was a Albuquerque PD and the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department. And very early in my career, I did an investigative series, long, multi-part, on the local sheriff's department, which culminated in putting the sheriff and 3 of his top aides in jail. So that felt pretty good. You know, I was doing
That
the
gave you
public
the taste.
service.
Yeah.
Yeah, gave me a real taste. Yeah,
What's the
not
what's
just
the
the post office wall.
we talked to a lot of people who at some point worked in that kind of local news, working on the cop beat and the courts. To be good at that job, what is something that you must have to be good at that level, kind of in your early journalism career? Something you have to be really good at that.
You have to ask very pointed, focused questions, not these long, rambly things that you see on cable television today. Pointed questions, and then shut up and listen. Listen. Because when there is silence, the other side fills it with words. And I learned that very early on. Just let people talk. You'll be amazed at the things they told me.
Yeah.
Making people a little uncomfortable. Like, humanity abhors a void. We don't like having silence. We don't like letting it linger. And so we try to fill it. And which is one reason why disinformation and or lack of information can, cause so much damage. But in this case, I think you're absolutely right. It's just like people want to tell their stories. People's favorite topic is them, generally, right?
Well, and when something's going wrong, like I remember way back in my Albuquerque days, I was approached. I hope I'm not breaking sources now, all these many years later, but I had officers come to me and say, let us tell you what the hell this sheriff is doing. And I said, okay, with my little notebook. And, when people feel there's an injustice, they want to tell the world. And I was there to listen.
I'd love to know, so much of your career has been defined by working in, the celebrity wrongdoing universe, right? I'd love to talk a little bit about the intersection of celebrity and journalism as it relates to when celebrities do something wrong. And I know that's kind of there's a million things I'm sure you could talk about in that capacity, but how hard is it to navigate that, because celebrities have such such reverence in American culture? Talk to me a little bit about that being a place that you did a lot of work.
Actually, I'll just quickly tell you. I mean, I started in radio in Albuquerque. I went to National Public Radio in Washington, D.C., where I did the newscasts on All Things Considered. And I had to get back out on the road. So then I got another job at another radio station covering Capitol Hill and the White House and the State Department and the Pentagon, Washington. Then I went to Channel 2 in New York. All of a sudden, I'm on television. I knew nothing about it, but I just was a good reporter, so I figured it out. So the bulk of my career has not really been in celebrity television. It's been in the crime and justice genre. But after I left Channel 2, I got into syndicated television, hard copy, the old TV show Hard Copy. And they moved, my husband and I, he's an anchor man on CBS radio stations for a million years. He's now retired. But one of my very first stories that they put me on at Hard Copy Los Angeles was this woman named Heidi Fleiss.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, I didn't know who she was. I didn't, okay, a madam, prostitute, whatever. And there I began to get seeped in the Hollywood celebrity. Oh my gosh, I got a copy of Heidi's Black Book from somebody during a police raid. She grabbed it, left, and gave it to me.
Like the original Black Book that we
Yeah. Little Black Book. I still have a copy of it in my storage closet back here. And there were all these famous names in it. It's like, wow. Very shortly after that, I get a tap on my shoulder from my news director at Hard Copy who says, hey, the cops are raiding Michael Jackson's house, his apartment on Wilshire and his house up in Santa Barbara County, the ranch. Figure it out. Okay. Now, I guess I didn't know enough to be cowed by the celebrity of Michael Jackson. Of course, I knew who he was. I loved his music. I could dance to all of the early tunes, Jackson 5. So I didn't go into that investigation, which, by the way, took more than a decade of my life and culminated
We'll get into that, yeah.
in this book. Oops,
Yes.
upside down. I didn't go into it like, ooh, I got to be careful. This is a celebrity. Ooh, let me call his PR person. I didn't go into it like that. I went into it like I went into every other potential criminal case. And I just knew, I guess to kind of answer your question, Andrew, I just knew instinctively that to raid the 2 homes in 2 different counties of somebody of Michael Jackson's stature, the cops had to have gone to a judge and shown that there was some there, or they would never have gotten those search warrants. So I went after the law enforcement angle. I mean, that's how I did it. I didn't go through his PR people. I didn't want the spin right away. I wanted to figure out what the story was. Then you go to them. Then they give you the no comment. So I don't know if I answered your question there, but I think there are way too many reporters on both coasts, but especially in Hollywood, Los Angeles, who shy away from doing celebrity stories. Because if you piss off that person's team, their lawyer, their PR people, their marketers, they have a lot of other celebrity clients and they'll just freeze you out. So I don't worry about stuff like that.
Yeah, the access journalism, right? And I think it's the same issue, the same problem exists in political journalism as well, right? You anger the wrong people, your sources dry up, and it's the power.
It happens
dynamic.
in sports too. It happens in sports journalism.
Also,
it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's a messed up power dynamic, right? And if nobody played the game wouldn't exist. But everyone plays the game, right?
Right. Except me.
Except you.
Well,
I wasn't smart enough to know there was a game to play out there.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I would imagine that when you were kind of in the thick of that, it was a little bit, because now everything is connected, right? Everything is there's the consolidation of power in the celebrity universe is much more prevalent now than it was before, where you have there's like 3 publicists running everything, right?
Yes.
And so I'm sure that was there was an advantage for you that you didn't have that dynamic, but you were still using those same principles you developed in Albuquerque to work on the Michael Jackson case, which obviously
and in New York, and just on the road. I've traveled to almost every state in the union, I think, just on assignment, and through osmosis you get to know where to go to find out the information you need. And it usually is not to the targeted person.
Right.
It's not to call up Michael Jackson and say, hey, did you really do this? It's to work the edges, nibble around the edges until you get into the center. You have your story, and then you call the Team Jackson and say, hey, I need some comments on what I've discovered.
There is a dynamic that exists today that didn't exist really back then, but you may have been one of the first people to really experience this in this kind of way. Like so many celebrities, mega celebrities, have armies of fans, and online and in social media now. They will come after you, and it's much easier to organize now on social media, obviously. But when you were doing Jackson, I think it's fair to say that you were, you know, those fans organized against you. It's quite the fan. Like,
Oh yeah.
what was it? What was that like?
Yeah, well, I first broke the Jackson story in August of '93.
Hmm.
And yet Al Gore had not discovered the internet
No,
yet.
not yet.
And there was no social media, there was no Facebook. And,
Hmm.
and so what I got were a lot of phone calls.
Mm.
And I just stopped answering my desk telephone at work. But I
What kind
remember,
of calls were you getting? What were those phone calls saying?
oh, I don't even think I could
No, you
repeat
can
the
say
words.
say it.
Well, Diane Dimond. They kept calling me a demon. Diane Dimond, you're a liar. You're a whore. You're a whatever. You're just
Yeah,
out to
no,
make money. Well, this is my job, folks.
yeah.
Yeah, I get a salary, but this is my job. We're gonna get you. We're gonna, it got really bad at one point. I walked out of the show was on the Paramount lot in Los
Hmm.
Angeles, and I walked out of work one day, crossing Gower Street to my car in the parking lot, and there were all these little girl fans there, start bumping you around, and there were three or four. Well, the next day there were like 12 or 15, and I finally said to my boss, hey, can I park inside the lot, please, so I can go out different ways every day. So they let me do that. But you're right, Dan. It did get so bad that hard copy Paramount got bodyguards for me to escort me to and from work. They swept my house for bugs. They did not find any. However, do you remember the name Anthony Pellicano?
Wait, why
He
do I
was,
know that
Sure,
name?
I sure
yeah,
do.
he's the private eye to the
Yes,
stars.
yes, 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 yes.
Yeah, Eddie Murphy. Yeah, he anyway. Um, I could give you a whole list of his celebrity clientele, but he finally went to prison for illegal surveillance. And what his cut to the chase, apparently he had developed a way to put a dish up on a local telephone repeater. So there were no bugs in the house, but there was I
Aimed
don't
at
know,
your house.
yeah, it was beamed at my house. And, things that I was saying privately to sources on my home phone were coming back to bite me the next day. Now, my husband is so smart. He said, come on outside. We didn't know if the house was bugged or not. So he said, let's take a walk around the property. We lived in the Hollywood Hills. And he said to me, let's do this. Let's plant a red herring. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to call you at work at 9 o'clock sharp, and let's talk about XYZ. I said, okay. So the next morning, 9 o'clock, I'm sitting there with the curlers in my hair, waiting to do my piece, do my stand-ups. And my husband calls and he says, hi, listen, we understand that you're doing a documentary piece about Anthony Pellicano. And when is that going to be on? I said, oh, well, honey, I can't really tell you that, but it's going to be a blockbuster. I wasn't working on anything about
Right.
Anthony Pellicano at all. I hung up the phone. I watched the clock, and like 15 minutes later, I get a tap on my shoulder in my cubicle, and it's one of the Paramount lawyers. And she says, hey, I need to see the script for that documentary you're doing on Pellicano. And I said, Cindy, I'm not doing it. Where did you get that information? She said, oh, from Howard Weitzman's office. I used to work there. Well, Howard Weitzman was Michael Jackson's attorney.
Wow.
So right then and there, thank you to my dear husband, Michael Schoen, I knew my phone is bugged. So I never used it again. If I needed to make a call, I would walk around the lot and we had coin phones then. I would walk around with, quarters in my pocket.
So,
Well,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, that's a realization that, like, you're swimming against a tide
Yeah.
that is massive, because this is,
That's
I
when it
mean,
began to dawn on me. Yes.
right, like, this is someone internally at the place where you're working who has gotten the word. So, like, I imagine you're like, how am I ever going to go up against something this large a network this expansive.
Yeah, I didn't think that. I thought, I'm going to get those sons of bitches.
Yeah, my
They're
question is
not going to get one up on me. That's my fighting spirit.
like, but my first thought is is someone organizing all this? Or is someone sending mobs of little girls to jostle you outside the lot? Is some, was there a central, power behind, because again, the social media didn't exist. This seems awfully the fans, the way the fans treated you seemed awfully organized in a time where that kind of stuff was tough to organize,
Right. I can't answer that, but
Yeah.
if there was one person, I think it was probably Anthony Pellicano. He
Mhm.
was very savvy, very smart. He's out of prison now, so I'm going to just leave it at that.
Sure.
But that was 93, 94, 95 a little bit. Then I moved back to New York, and then there was a second young accuser in 2003, and I broke that story too. Now there's social media.
Yeah.
Now I'm inundated I still get death threats on Twitter. Well, what do we call it now? X. I still get nasty emails from people writing to my old email address that I'll go back and look at periodically, that I'm a terrible person. I'm a liar. I'm going to go to hell. Don't I understand that Michael Jackson was like Jesus? He never could have done this.
What do you think is behind that? What do you think is behind that disbelief? The unwillingness to believe that this could be true, that this is true.
Ignorance.
Yeah.
Just ignorance. And, there are a couple that got so bad. I got a PI friend of mine to say, where's this IP address coming from? And it's coming from Germany or Norway. Or I just think it's young kids that read online all about Michael Jackson and how horrible Diane Dimond was and how I was in bed with the district attorney. Stop it.
I think Michael Jackson maybe hit in a way overseas. Like, he was a megastar here, of course, but I think he meant something. I remember I was at Epcot once, and I went to go see Captain EO, which is no longer there. But, for those of you who are not familiar with Captain EO, it was sort of an immersive film experience starring Michael Jackson in some sort of space adventure. But anyway, when I was there, it was me, the person I was with, and the rest of the theater was filled with a Brazilian tour group, right? And
wait a minute. Did you notice how he said, the person I was with? Do you not want us to know who you were with? That's one of those focused questions. Now I'll
Yeah.
It's complicated.
I'm sorry, Dan.
Answer.
I didn't mean to.
Complicated answer. It was my girlfriend at the time. Me and my girlfriend at the time, and a theater full of a Brazilian tour group. And in the film Captain EO, Michael Jackson is put in peril by a space beast of some kind, right? The Brazilian tour group got viscerally angry at the movie for putting Michael Jackson in danger. They're yelling at the screen. And I'm like, he's not actually in space. He's not actually in danger, but they're so bad. Like, no, not Miguel, right? Like, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. And, that was my experience with sort of like Michael Jackson fans from overseas. And it sounds like, you got a taste of that every day.
Yeah. And the huge contingent in Germany, Norway, Ireland. Irish radio used to call me from the criminal trial in 2005. And during a court break, I'd do an interview with Irish radio. And they told me, stunningly, we have so many Michael Jackson fans in Ireland, but we have stopped playing his music because of all of this. Well, he wasn't even convicted. He was just on trial. He never was convicted. But yeah, there's a lot of European passion, I guess, that we may.
Well, and I think one of the things that's surprising to me is that mob, for lack of a better term, like, it's still around.
It's a good term. It's a good term.
Just the other, I guess last year, I listened to the Audible podcast series Think Twice, and I posted something on X about it, how it was a really good series. And like, I mean, I'm nobody. I got like 12 angry tweets from people who were like, on team Michael Jackson. And I'm like, this is still in 2023, 24. This is still a thing that people are vehemently fighting for.
You know, if you want to listen to a really good podcast, I think I was on that thing twice.
I think you were. Now that I think about it, yeah.
Interviewed me for that.
Now that you've thought twice.
There's and I'm sorry, I haven't listened to that one. Don't.
It's really good. It's pretty good.
Okay, I'll have to listen.
Yeah.
A better one, I'll bet you, is a thing called Telephone Stories, the Michael Jackson case. And it's two fellows. Brandon Ogborn is the primary, and he's talking to his best friend on the phone. They both have young kids. What do you think? Could he have done it? And over the course of, I think it's 12 episodes, they interview everybody. Brandon Ogborn got Michael Jackson's lawyers from back then to talk to him. And they never talked to anybody.
No.
It's a really, really good series if you're interested. There, I just plugged Brandon. It's really good.
You know, we talked about when this mob started coming for you, and through all of the Jackson, the journey that was the Jackson criminal trials. Did you ever have, and if I feel like I should know this, but I'm just going to be candid. Did you ever have an opportunity to sit down and talk to Michael Jackson?
No. One day I was standing outside the courthouse. There's a pathway, a little patio, and then you go into the court. And I was on the phone with my desk back in New York, and here he comes. He was late. And he came in and he stopped dead and he looked at me and he you know, his little voice like this. No. Yeah. At that moment, we locked eyes and he went, ugh! And then he went into court. So that's the closest I ever got to having a conversation with him, which wasn't.
Was he threatening you, or was he just being weird?
Just probably weird.
Okay, that tracks.
Listen, I'm 5'6". I probably weighed about the same as him. I'm a tomboy at heart. I probably could have taken him on if he wanted to.
But not if it was a dance fight.
No, I cannot moonwalk. That's for sure.
When you look back at your career, I mean, obviously Michael Jackson is a huge part, and that story is a huge part of your career. But when you look back at your career and the things that you've covered, what are the ones that really stick with you and jump out at you, non-Michael Jackson division?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that, because, you know, I have this whole body of work.
Right.
It has nothing to do with Michael Jackson. It has to do with unjust situations that happen to ordinary people.
Sure.
Well, I remember early in my TV career, you know, politics, you cover Capitol Hill, you know, it's all spoon fed to you. There's no real investigation there. But once I got into Channel 2 in New York, I remember doing a series about chromium poisoning. Now that sounds boring, but I covered New Jersey many times for them, mostly for them. And there was something in the water table and the land that was getting into people's bodies and killing them. And I interviewed a woman who was a nurse whose husband died of chromium poisoning, and she went to his autopsy because she knew the doctor doing it. And they cut him open and his blood was green. Chromium poison is green. And, you know, that kind of story. Flash forward to hard copy. I would scour newspapers. I still do it to this day. And I saw a little article about 3 secretaries down in San Diego who took in a homeless woman. I thought, wow. So I called them. I went down there. They found this woman in front of the 7-Eleven. They took her in, and she didn't remember who she was. Turns out she had a diabetic reaction and had been in a coma, woke up. She's in the street living with a dog that she had. And so I traced her. I discovered she was a veteran. She was due all this pension money, all of this VA help. I found her family in Nebraska. We got her on an airplane and sent her back to Nebraska so she could be with her family. She had been an IT expert and had done the software program for the Los Angeles Times. And she wound up on the street, which was a long story. But Hard Copy gave me the whole show for Thanksgiving Day to tell her story. So those stories are the ones that stay with me, Andrew. Those and the jailhouse interviews. You know,
Yeah.
I went in. I was the only one to ever interview Polly Klaas's killer, um, Jeffrey McDonald, the Green Beret killer. I did the Hillside Strangler killer. I did James Earl Ray. I interviewed James Earl Ray. So, you know, these are the ones that pop out in my mind when you ask me that. And Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
You've talked with killers, you've talked with victims.
Yeah.
How do you, I'm sure, what's your technique for, or I don't know if you, I know it's not a monolithic, I use this set of techniques for this person, this set of techniques for that person, but like, how different are those experiences? What kind of, what are you trying to get out of each of those conversations when you go to them? How do you kind of handle these very different ends of the spectrum,
Yeah. I try to get into people's soul.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to remember Kenneth Bianchi, one of the Hillside Stranglers. I interviewed him at Walla Walla Prison. And I just thought, you know, everybody knows what he did with his cousin, D'Angelo, and all these women they killed. And, you know, I want to know about this guy. So I started talking to him about him. And he had a son. And I brought that up to him. And this killer, this serial killer, started to cry like a baby. It was stunning. And so I always tried to bring to every story I did something that the audience didn't know. You know, you're a child molestation victim. Tell me what that's done to the rest of your life. Tell me, does that come back to haunt you? Does it manifest through everything you do, or have you forgotten about it? So I try to go to the humanness of a story, be it a killer or a victim.
Have you ever
And
talked
I
to
don't know if it
someone who,
works.
yeah, have you ever talked to someone who's they don't have a soul, they lack humanity, or
Yes, yes. What was Polly Klaas's killer, Alan? Um, yeah, this is how long ago it was. Rodney Allen? No, I've forgotten his name. Isn't that horrible? But
Richard Allen Davis.
thank you, Richard Allen Davis. I knew there was an Allen in there somewhere. I got him as he was going from county to state custody because at the time, no state prisoner could be interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a great producer, Santina Lucci. She's fabulous. She's at ABC now, big wig there. She found out this little narrow window, and I went to county and I interviewed him in a tiny little room with guards standing behind him. And he came in with shackles and shackled to his feet around his waist. And we sat, I'm not kidding, like 4 feet away from each other. And at one point I said to him, you know, you are the most hated man in America right now. And he threw his head back. He was very hairy. And he started to laugh like a hyena. I mean, seriously, like an animal. And I just let him do it. I didn't interrupt him. I just let him do it. And it was one of the most chilling things I've ever faced. So close like that, because he threw his head back and then he came forward. Came forward. And the 2 guards behind him stepped forward. And I thought, oh man, I've had it now. If he's got a pencil, I'm dead or blind. So that's what pops into my mind when you say that.
And you didn't detect any.
No humanity.
No humanity. Like it was just a void.
Yeah.
Empty soul.
And no empty soul, soulless. I mean, this is a guy who kidnapped a little girl during her slumber party for her birthday with all her little girlfriends watching. He opened the sliding glass door, grabbed her, stuffed her in the trunk. And the next thing anybody found of her, she was dead. So no, completely soulless. On the other end of that spectrum was James Earl Ray, Martin Luther King assassin, convicted of, who was empty. The guy could not give me a cent. It's the worst interview I ever did. He could not answer a question. I
Why do you
think
think that
maybe he
is?
was brain damaged or something. I just don't know. But you would say, did you kill Martin Luther King? That's the wrong question, he said. Really? No, that is the question. No, that's the wrong question. I couldn't, it was really hard for me to make a piece to present on television
Sure.
with that interview, even though I spent an hour with the guy.
Yeah.
Did he tell you what the right question was?
Yeah, yes. I should be asking about a guy named Raul
Hmm.
who came from Cuba to do the deed, and it wasn't really him. And you know,
You've covered a lot of crime in your career, obviously. Dan and I have done a lot of crime, journalism as well, and we oftentimes ask ourselves why it is people are so drawn to this kind of news and information.
mhm.
Um, and I think we all have kind of thoughts about it, but I'm curious
You
what
know, why
your
does our
perspective
audience
is.
exist?
Yeah, like why are people so drawn to this universe?
And why are we so drawn to it?
Right.
All three of us. Why are we so drawn to the darkest side of civilization, of our fellow citizens? I think it's because we mostly live pretty humdrum lives. You know, we get up in the morning, we eat the breakfast, have a coffee, go to work, come home, do the grocery shopping, feed the kids, make the lunches, take them to soccer. Nah, same thing over and over, year after year after year after year. And when an aberration occurs, if you're doing the dishes and something suddenly flies by the window, your eye goes to it. When an aberrational story comes into our lives, we stop and we go, what? We watch Dateline, we watch 48 Hours, we watch, uh, listen to your podcast, Deviant. We are fascinated by what we know humanity can do, but we would never do.
Yeah, it's so far outside our context, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Can
and
you imagine? I'm the daughter of a butcher. Okay,
mhm.
my father was a college professor, hated it, made his own business with the GI Bill, had a wholesale meat company. He was a butcher. I was taught to be have reverence for very sharp knives. Can you imagine taking a knife and plunging it into somebody you love, somebody you married, the mother of your children, but yet it happens all the time.
Right.
And I want to know why. And I
Well, I
think
also think,
the public wants to know why. How?
yeah, and I also think that I think that there's also an interesting people tried to figure out, if I were in that circumstance or in that situation, how would I react? And
Mhm.
they kind of project themselves into that universe and think, what would I do? How would I react? How would I handle it?
Could I
So
take that butcher knife from my kitchen and use it to defend myself? Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Or, if somebody did that to my husband or my wife or my kids, how would I move on? How would I survive the rest of my life with such an incredible amount of loss, right?
Right.
So I think it's kind of it's there's a weird kind of trying to relate to whatever that story is.
yeah. I also
Um,
think there's a primal aspect to it, right?
Mhm.
There's a reason ghost stories are so popular, and why the old fairy tales are so nefarious, right? And there's a reason that true crime is probably the world's oldest genre. Like this isn't new. This
Jack the
isn't a
Ripper.
bubble. Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
You know, just think about how that was treated, right? These people believe that monsters are real, and as we grow over time, it becomes less supernatural and more they can look just like us. They're not sent here by the devil, or or maybe they are, depending what you believe. But these are people that are just like us, but when we can look them in the eye, but they're not like us at all, and they could be anybody, right? And
Right.
I just think now people are attracted to these almost real life ghost stories in a way that the oral tradition would tell the stories about these people around the campfire in the year 560 or whatever, right? This is the modern equivalent to that.
Yeah. That's very, very prescient, very astute. I think you're right. I think we all need to be entertained in our life. And
Hmm.
sometimes entertainment can be of a negative nature, murder, crime, rape. I mean, I'm fascinated by these Venezuelan gang members that are taking over apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado. when I was covering the JonBenet Ramsey case, I mean, I know Aurora, Colorado. It's like, how is this allowed to happen? Who are these people? They act like animals beating on strangers' doors to get in. Again, it's
Is
that
that actually
separation.
happening? Like,
What's that?
is that actually happening in Aurora?
Yeah, I mean, there's video of it, and just recently there were emails going back and forth between city council and the local police department saying, "Oh my God, we got a problem with these people. What do we
Yeah.
do?" But they didn't tell the population. They didn't tell the residents that there were 200 members of this Venezuelan gang that had moved into Little Aurora, Colorado. Anyway, I digress. I think you have it exactly right, both of you. We're attracted by the uh, unexplainable of it all, the outrage of it all.
What about
Is
on
there?
the?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, I was just going to wonder if there a story out there that you wish, man, I got that. I wish I got that one, or I wish I want to get into this more, or what's your dream story that you haven't done, or maybe one day you will do?
Well, I'm reticent to even say this, but I will. After the Michael Jackson case, part of the negative fan reaction to me was that I was a racist. I'm a racist. My best friend really was Black, Brenda Box. She's passed away now. But anyway, I digress. The story that came to me that I said, I'm sorry, I just can't touch it, was R. Kelly. I had people calling me, writing me, "Hey, you did Michael Jackson. There's another guy, R. Kelly. He's got 13-year-old girls. He's taken," and I just had to tell all these women, sisters of the victims or mothers of the victims, I'm sorry, I just can't do it. Another Black, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to take on another Black man for an alleged sexual crimes. And I didn't have it in me.
That's understandable.
I just couldn't do it. And now, of course, we have Sean P. Diddy. That one never came to me, but boy, that one brewed for many, many decades, apparently. And why it never came out, it's back, Andrew, to your celebrity question. People tiptoed around it. Apparently, everybody had heard about these parties that he had, drugging people and orgies and rape, but nobody said anything.
Same deal with Weinstein, right? Like, everyone knew about it.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I was actually talking to my wife about the Diddy story not long ago, and she was asking me just kind of rhetorically, like, how do these things happen? And I said, I think we underestimate what power and influence do in the American, culture.
Yep.
Like the quickness and the speed with which people will look the other way because someone is powerful. I think we underestimate that.
Yeah, I do too. Again, I used to cover the White House, and I would see that behavior. Wait a minute, that's not right. But yeah, but he works in the White House. Hey, but what about, yeah, but he's a congressman, so I let him do it. I had girlfriends tell me horror stories. I was a mother of a very young child at the time, so nobody bothered with me. I was always out of there to go pick my kid up. But yeah, I mean, this goes back to my work on Jackson. It was stunning to me that the first accuser's father, when he found out, yes, according to his son, told his father, yes, he touches my penis. Why didn't he go to the police? Why didn't that father, who was a dentist, he was a professional, why didn't he go directly to the police? No. He went to Anthony Pellicano and others to try to negotiate a screenwriting deal. What? As the parent of a child, that's unfathomable to me. But he was dealing with a powerful celebrity. So I don't understand that mindset. I just can't get into it at all.
I think it extends beyond celebrities too. I mean, there's all sorts of. Let's take the example of, you'll hear plenty of stories about this. A teacher who was having a relationship with a student, right? This other students may know, other parents may know, other teachers may know, but no one says anything.
See, I wasn't brought up like that.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody did anything to my daughter, I'd be down at the local police department screaming and yelling
Yeah.
for justice.
I think maybe it's. I'm armchair, psychoanalyzing here, but I think people are scared to stand up. People are scared to raise their head because it could get chopped off. What if I'm wrong? What if this person
Mhm.
sues me into oblivion? Like there's, these power structures, are difficult.
What
Even
if
at
they're
that like high school level, right?
what if their fans come after me?
Yeah, exactly. And
What,
not all, I mean, more, fans aren't, relegated to celebrities. CEOs have fans, popular teachers have fans, right?
it's the
I never
development
really
of these
thought about it like that.
parasocial. It's the development of these parasocial relationships, right?
Yeah.
And I get one of the things I was going to ask you, Diane, is like, do you think we are now in a place in the world where people are more willing to stand up to that than they were 20 years ago? I feel
Yeah,
like maybe we are, but that's just
yeah,
my.
absolutely. I mean, that short-lived Me Too movement, the whistleblower. I just came from the whistleblower summit in Washington, D.C. People are more willing now to stand up. We just saw whistleblowers in front of Congress talking about, the Trump investigations, and let's not get into politics, but yeah, I think so. And the best example of that, the most recent, is the P. Diddy story.
Mm-hmm.
There came this lawsuit about these parties and the rape and the sexual assaults and the whatever. And now there are, don't quote me, but there's like multiple dozens of people who've come forward to say, yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm.
Happened to me. I'm going to file a lawsuit. So, yeah, I think people are way more willing now to slap the celebrity off their throne in
Right.
the name of justice. I mean, it's really hard for people to come forward and say, I was sexually abused. I was drugged and I was raped by 3 men, and P. Diddy was standing there watching me, whatever the allegation is. It's it's life changing and not to the positive for a victim like that to come forward, a victim of a celebrity or someone as powerful as Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein or, P. Diddy or R. Kelly, any of them.
They all have their fans.
And what's
Yeah,
interesting,
it makes me mad when people say, oh, well, how come they waited so long? How come, oh, they filed a lawsuit? They're just after money. Well, you got to prove your allegation or you
and
don't get any money. And it's torturous cross-examination. I've sat in so many courtrooms and listened to victims tell their stories and just lose control of themselves. It's not easy to come forward. I applaud people who do. I applaud the real victims who do.
and it's interesting because if we're talking about being in a place now where people are feeling more empowered to stand up and say
Mhm.
something, the the what's interesting to me is we're also at a place where people have never been able to be closer to people in power. And by that I mean people who have TikTok accounts, people who follow you on celebrities on Instagram, they follow them on all of the different social media platforms.
Mhm.
Of there's much less distance now between the fans and the people that they follow, yet people are feeling more empowered to stand up and say something at the same time. It's an interesting kind of dichotomy.
Yeah, it also makes you, the public person, a easier target.
Yeah.
Wrote a syndicated column on crime and justice issues for 14 years. And I wrote a column once about a shooter in Santa Barbara on a campus. And he killed his roommates. Then he went to the campus to a sorority and started
Yes.
shooting. And anyway, Isla Vista was the name of the place. And in this column, I said something about his sick mind. From that column, I got a stalker. I don't even want to tell you his name because he's still out there and he's just a maniac. But this guy decided that I was against disabled people who had sick minds like him. I have a sick mind and I'm coming after you and I'm going to this and I mean, I would get 80 emails from the guy in a day. And I finally reported him to the LA, to the division of the LAPD that deals with that stuff, because I knew the detective there. Rosabelle Ferfarino was her name. Anyway, I wrote to Rosabelle and I said, hey, you know, this guy seems dangerous. He is now said to me, I will be the next mass shooter. He should be on your radar. But they couldn't do anything about him. Freedom of speech, they said. It's freedom of speech. So
yeah,
I wasn't his only target. I mean, there are dozens of us now.
Sounds just like that shooter. That's the incel guy who recorded the manifesto in his BMW, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you remember.
I do. Yeah.
That's a sick mind. I'm sorry.
Sick mind. And what you said, this guy was that your stalker was saying sounds a lot like the things. I think his name was Elliot, the actual shooter, if I'm remembering. Yeah.
Yeah.
What he was saying.
The son of a Hollywood producer. He was the son of a Hollywood.
Exactly. I forget his last name at the moment, but I know I'm being mindful of the time, so I'll I'm especially excited to ask you this question. I like to end all our interviews with this question, but especially you, I'm excited to ask this. What did we not ask you that we should have?
I wanted you to ask me about my latest book. And
tell us about your latest book.
Oh, thank you so much for
asking. Tell us about your latest book.
About 8 years before this book came out, I started to investigate cases of adult guardianships that were so abusive, they'd make your jaw drop. Mm-hmm. So I collected these stories from across the country, and the guardianship system, it's called conservatorship in some states. It's what Britney Spears was in.
Yeah. Right.
Is, I think, the most under-discussed civil rights issue of our time. Because when you are put in guardianship, you may not even know it's happening. Anybody can file a guardianship petition. Judges routinely approve them. They labeled you an incapacitated ward of the court, and they take all your money. They seize all your money, and they put all your assets, your home, your property, your investments, your vehicle, everything you have, and they put it into the name of whoever is appointed as a guardian. Well, even if your family wants to be your guardian, judges, I discovered, are routinely naming these, familiar faces that hang around their courtrooms, these for-profit guardians. Because, after all, the family had to come to court to ask for guardianship. They must be dysfunctional. And these guardians are unbelievable. Look, there's a lot of really good people working in the system, but there are really a lot of bad people. And state courts have taken control of $50 billion in wards' assets every single year. So it accumulates to a pot of, hundreds of billions of dollars that's available for the unscrupulous to steal. They just literally steal it. And so I have spent a great deal of my later life here, as I get to be an old lady, sitting at my computer with my cats, writing about the injustices of guardianship. And if you go to my website, I got a lot more information about it.
What's your website?
Talk for hours about it, but anyway.
What's your website?
DianeDimond.com. And there's no A in Dimond, Dimond.
And what's the name of your book?
Oh, it's called We're Here to Help, which all the guardians say, oh, we're here to help when guardianship goes wrong. And there are thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of cases from all over the country. And Washington knows about it, but they haven't ever done anything to stop it. They say it's up to the states. Well, the states are doing a really lousy job.
And listeners, viewers, if you want to check it out, there's a link in the description below. There'll be a link in the podcast description to Diane's website, as well as a link to the book. Diane, thank you so much for spending time with us. I love the conversation.
Thank you so much, Diane.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.